Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello, Joseph.
Who's Elizabeth and how are you involved in the Africa Climate Summit?
Thank you so much, Joseph, for having me here today. My name is Elizabeth Wathuti. I am an environmentalist and a young climate leader, and I'm also the lead coordinator for the Africa Youth Climate Assembly, that is the official youth engagement framework for the Africa Climate Summit and beyond.
The Africa Youth Summit. What is that, and tell us more about it?
So the Africa Youth Climate Assembly is scheduled for the 1st to the 3rd of September, and it's a precursor of the Africa Climate Summit. And the main reason for this assembly is to make sure that young people from across the African continent are able to genuinely and meaningfully engage at the Africa Climate Summit. And we are bringing to Nairobi young Africans from across the African continent to be able to showcase their solutions and to be able to engage with leaders. And at the same time, we will also be presenting the African Youth Climate Declaration to the heads of states. And beyond that, this is an opportunity for young people across the continent to be able to ensure that we have systematically embedded youth engagement into the existing frameworks, the environment and climate conversations at the moment.
Thank you. So as a youth or a member of the youth, as you know, this is an AU summit hosted by Kenya and by His Excellency the President of Kenya. How are we ensuring that this summit will focus on youth from across the continent and not just Kenyan youth? And as it's such a diverse continent, how do you get all the voices into the room in a way that's meaningful?
I think since the Africa Youth Climate Assembly started the preparations, one of the biggest assignments that we've been embarking on has been coalition building. And by coalition building is being able to reach out to young people from across different countries in our continent. And at the same time, by the fact that with the physical presence of the about 400 young people that we are looking to bring to Nairobi, about 126 of them, we envision to have them come from different countries across the continent. And that means at least 2 young people from every country in Africa to come to Nairobi and be able to physically and in person engage at the assembly. And we are also engaging in regional consultations, and by regional consultations we also acknowledge and recognize the fact that it's not every young person that may have an opportunity to come and participate in person for the assembly, but through these consultations it means that every voice of every young person is being heard at the assembly, because the consultations means that the issues that we are going to bring to the table to the heads of state at the Africa Climate Summit are then through these consultations being put together by different young people across different regions. So we have actually divided these consultations into the 5 regions across the continent, and they're all being spearheaded by different entities and organizations that have already done a lot of coalition building across the continent. And then all of these voices, all of these solutions are going to be brought to the Africa Climate Summit. And secondly, we also have an innovation challenge for young people that is greatly being supported by the Green Africa Youth Organization. And this means that young people from across the continent that are innovating, some of those that are going to win this challenge will have an opportunity to have grants presented to them to go and showcase their innovations. So these are some of the ideas in which we are looking to engage as many young people from across the African continent as possible, because we acknowledge and recognize the fact that Kenya is only playing a host role for this, but this is indeed an African summit, and it needs to actually engage all the young people from across the continent.
Now, when you think about the Africa Climate Summit and His Excellency the President of Kenya's vision, he talks of us being in this together, about this being about all of us bringing our respective technology, financing, expertise, resources to collectively address the climate crisis. How do the youth see this narrative? Do they connect with it? Does it resonate? How do they feel about this narrative around a collective action as opposed to finger pointing or blame game?
I think one of the most beautiful thing about the narrative is, for us as young people, we see young people as one of that main and major resource that the African continent contributes to the solutions that we talk about in the climate crisis. And by young people being a resource to the continent. It's because of all the ideas, the innovations, and the solutions that young people from across the continent are bringing to the table to be able to address these solutions. And with the same narrative that the Africa Climate Summit is around how we can be able to showcase Africa's resources to, in a way, attract capital investments that can be able to help us maximize and scale some of the solutions that we bring to the table. For us as young people, it's to be able to get that opportunity as well, to be able to showcase the solutions, the ideas, and the innovations that we are bringing to the table, because we strongly believe that apart from the continent being the most affected by the climate crisis, it's the same continent that brings so much to the table in terms of the solutions, and we need to begin shaping the narrative of the African continent as the continent of solutions, as the continent of resources that can be able to elevate this world into bigger scales in terms of how we are responding to the climate crisis. And I really like the fact that a lot of young people, it's more on the urgency. How fast and quick can we begin to work on solutions on the ground that will enable us to really address the climate crisis with the urgency it deserves? And I think for us, that is what we are bringing to this summit. And that is why a lot of the work we are doing even right now is being able to document these stories, to document these innovations, to document all these voices of young people, and then make sure that at the Africa Climate Summit, these voices are unified and also amplified in a way that they can continue to push this conversation to position Africa as a continent of solutions to the climate crisis.
Thank you. Now you talk about solutions, and when you think about solutions, there are technology solutions, there are financial solutions, there are social solutions.
Yes.
What examples of solutions that are coming from young people that you've seen that really stand out? What are some examples that you can share so we see how young people are thinking about the climate crisis and their role in helping solve it?
The solutions that young people bring to the table are numerous, and I have personally been able to work with a lot of young people that are innovating, and especially in the energy space. If you get to the renewable energy space, a lot of these solutions and innovations are being led by young people. For instance, even just right here in Nairobi, I have been to Kibera, where young people are leading solutions on solar power. They're leading solutions on biodigesters energy to make sure that there is biogas that is being used by communities in informal settlements to be able to prepare meals for their children. And they're linking up these solutions with an understanding that it's about addressing the climate crisis, it's about addressing air pollution, it's about addressing the interconnected crisis that we are in. And it's also young people that are helping restore biodiversity. I work with a lot of young people myself through my organization, the Green Generation Initiative, where we are helping children in Kenya to be able to create their own green spaces, and to create their own green spaces also with corners that help them grow fruit trees in a huge way. And these fruit trees are helping them address the issue of food insecurity. And also the fruit trees have a commercial value, because it is also an understanding that for all the efforts that we are bringing to the table, we also need to make sure that our communities are benefiting, they're earning a living out of it. And for us being able to, for example, grow the fruit trees with these farmers and the communities, it means that they are able to earn a living that helps them, for example, to continue taking their children to school, to continue earning a living in every way possible. And I also know a lot of young people across the continent that are innovative in the same space through technology, digitization, being able to help us spread this information about the climate crisis far and wide. And I think right now, even in the climate literacy world, it's a lot more young people that are using the digital space to educate their communities, to educate their schools, and to educate so many people about what they can be able to do to address the climate crisis, and to even educate communities about how they can build their resilience. For instance, the communities in drought-affected areas, there's a lot of more people right now that have been training communities about what drought-resistant crops are, for example. And I think all of these innovations are innovations that are unique in their own way. And we also have innovations around using art to be able to amplify and bring the messages of climate and environment to the platform. And these are solutions that we will actually also be showcasing at the assembly. And we've also had a lot of engagements with young people as well that are focusing on circular economy and being able to address, for example, the challenge of plastic pollution. And they are using this waste, for example, to turn it into energy. They're using this waste to turn it into usable products that they can be able to sell back to the market. And I think for us, this is the beauty of innovations, and seeing it in a way that it's not just about being able to create new things, but it's also about how creating these new things are able to regenerate our environment, but also support our communities to continue to thrive and survive, and to also, in a huge way, become the end of poverty. Because when you are creating employment out of it, then it means that our communities are thriving in the same way.
One of the feedback I keep hearing is that there's no capital for young people and their innovations. There's no proper financing to help them take ideas to the market. His Excellency President Ruto's vision is that we need a new global finance architecture that unlocks climate finance at scale, that is targeted and is fit for purpose towards the solutions you just described. And while the agenda is usually focused on large investments, whether it's grid-based renewables, or it's large-scale agriculture, or it's nature solutions across the Congo Basin, some of the solutions you're describing are relatively small, targeted towards communities. How do you see the global climate finance architecture conversation dovetailing into what young people need in order to unlock these opportunities they're developing?
Yeah, I think restructuring the global financial mechanisms that exist right now will be a big win for the African continent, a big win for young people, especially if we are able to localize investments. And by localizing investments means being able to also trust our local communities and our young people with resources in a way that they can be able to use those resources to maximize on their impact. As we stand right now, a lot of young people are usually competing for finances for their innovations and their locally led solutions with very big, well-established organizations. And there is no direct link to how a lot more young people can be able to access some of these finances. And honestly, for a lot of young people, for the solutions they're leading, not a lot of them actually need to have like really huge lump sums to be able to kickstart their startups. Some of them actually need even like a little small capital to kickstart their startups. And I think being able to understand the dynamics and the way in which young people are engaging right now would be very important for us, and in a way that we can localize these investments, in a way that we can make the systems of even accessing these finances as simple as they can get. Because we have a lot of young people at the grassroots levels. These are young people that have never been to the COPs, they have never been to these summits, but they are leading the solutions. They have so much that they're bringing to the table. So how are we able to decentralize that and bring that information down and the systems much easier for them to be able to access these finances, to be able to get to the next level? I think for us, this is going to be like the most important thing, that we ensure that these finances don't have to go through so many channels. They just have to have a direct access, and also a dedicated youth fund as well at the same time that really directly supports youth-led climate solutions in a way that they do not have to really be at the same wing balance with really big organizations. I think for us, if we have that understanding and also have an opportunity to walk the journey with young people. I have worked with a lot of young people right now that have startups, that are leading organizations. Most of these young people may not even have registered entities. And also because of the fact that it's not very easy to register the entities, but how are we able to work with even networks? A network, for example, the Africa Youth Climate Assembly has already brought together these coalitions and be able to, in a way, work with hubs and groups that enable these young people in these networks to access the finances, and then we walk the journey with them to help them grow their institutions, and at the same time to help them maximize on the impact of what they're bringing to the table. I think for us, that is what we would like to see in terms of localizing the investments from the smallest startup to that starting up organization, and that has already kickstarted, in a way that we can help them to make a very huge impact. But that cannot happen without an easy access to these finances.
Thank you. You mentioned the Youth Climate Fund. Is that something you expect to launch at the Youth Summit, or is that something that's still in development?
So it's actually something we plan to put forward as one of the key issues that we are putting out there to the heads of states through the Africa Youth Climate Declaration. And we really hope that this is something that can get adopted in a way that our young people across the African continent get a really easy access to finances for them to be able to continue leading on the climate solutions on the ground. And this is regardless of whether they are grassroots young people or regardless of which country in Africa they come from, but in a way that it is easily accessible to every young person, including that young person who has no link or access to information. So it has to be like as simple as possible, without a lot of logistics as possible, in a way that young people can just be allowed to get the wings and fly and be able to lead on those solutions in their communities.
So part of the theme, of course, is that we're not victims. This is not about victimhood.
Yeah.
This is about each of us standing in our strength
Yeah.
and being part of a solution.
Yeah.
And so you've talked very clearly and very articulately about how young people can engage with other stakeholders.
Yeah.
But how are the young people self-organizing to leverage their knowledge, their networks,
Yeah.
their own capital, however small,
Yeah.
to actually start driving some of these solutions? Because
Yeah.
sometimes you have to prove a concept before others believe you.
Yeah, I think that has been the beauty about being a young person, and a lot of people talk about young people with the fact that they drive things with urgency. We like to see things move really fast, and I think that is one that I can call the power of the young people, being able to organize, to come together, to build networks, to build coalitions, and even use those coalitions to resource mobilize, to be able to engage with their communities. And I've seen a lot of young people self-organize, self-mobilize, and self-resource mobilize in a way that they can be able to scale up their solutions. And there are a lot of examples of young people that have been able to get to that point, and to get to that point not because of not because the systems allow them to get to that point, but because they've persevered and because they have shown a lot of resilience and been able to raise their own resources. And even a good example with what we are trying to do right now with the Africa Youth Climate Assembly, that is actually purely youth-led, is a show of example that young people can actually come together and discuss ideas and solutions, and then come to the leaders and present these ideas and tell them that, look, we want to be involved at the Africa Climate Summit. And I think that is how the whole journey of the assembly started. Young people coming together, putting their ideas together and saying, we cannot have our voices left behind at this summit that is coming to Kenya, and it's coming to Africa for the first time. So we put all these things together, started doing our own coalition building, and then presented this to the leaders, to the ministry, and we said that we really need to have young people engaged in a meaningful and genuine way. And I think for us, being able to get that go ahead is just a show of how young people can sort of bring their voices and ideas together and bring themselves to the table at the same time. Because sometimes when young people ask to be brought to the table, there's always that conversation. But I can tell you right now, a lot of young people have really had that courage to actually invite themselves to the table and make sure that everything that they're trying to push is actually presented there. And of course, it doesn't have to be like that, because it's important that young people are always in the thoughts when we're organizing things. But I think right now the struggle has been that we have to invite ourselves to the table. But I think it's a show of resilience. It's a show that young people, they know what they bring to the table, and they know the value that they add to the table. And that is why there's been a lot of these trying to make things happen. And I have been with a lot of young people that anytime they want to speak even to heads of state, it's going to happen, because they believe that it's going to happen, and they do a lot of organizing for it, and they're able to create that opportunity for themselves. And I think for me, that is the most important thing, of being able to have the power to self-organize, self-mobilize, and to self-raise resources that can be able to help us move further. And I think what needs to happen right now is just that systemic embedment of what we're trying to bring to the table, to make this now much easier, so that we do not have to fight through a system or fight through some barriers to be able to get there. Because if the system provides for that, then it becomes automatic that every young person, even those that come after us, there's already a set system that allows them to engage effectively, that allows them to raise resources for their locally led solutions in a way that they don't have to struggle, and that allows them to be acknowledged as equal stakeholders rather than just invitees for the forums because they are young people.
That's very interesting. Now, if you think about the theme of the summit, which is we are in this together, from a young person perspective and from the youth assembly, what will you hope to achieve after the summit? I have seen youth go to summits, to COP, stand on stage, speak very articulately, and then go back home to the same problems they had before the summit. What is going to be different about this one?
So the Africa Youth Climate Assembly, I can say it's very different because we are not looking at it as just an event. We're not looking at it as just a 3-day assembly, but we're looking at it as well in terms of the challenges that we have right now, in terms of the continent, on how we are able to organize ourselves as young people under an umbrella that allows policymakers, leaders, and heads of states to engage with us in a really existing system that is part of the framework. And I think for us with the assembly is how we can be able to systematically embed our engagement beyond the summit. And we have an entire roadmap, a roadmap that started way back in February with the AU Town Hall of young people. And since then, this has been an ongoing roadmap that has also been able to allow us to engage with different frameworks, and even right now that will allow us to engage as well with the AMSEN, with the ministerial at the AMSEN, and also after the Africa Climate Summit engage with the UNGA COP28 all the way to UNEA in next year. And the reason why there is this kind of a roadmap is so that our messaging and our narrative is consistent through, and as well aligns with what the, for example, the Africa Climate Summit is going to adopt, because we want this messaging and the narrative to follow through this roadmap in a way that we are not just having a 3 days activity or a 3 days event, but our narrative and our messaging is as clear all the way throughout this roadmap in a way that we can continue to engage in the same way. And of course, the assembly in itself is not going to be held just now and it ends there, because it's going to continue being an entity that is actually well registered and an umbrella that is recognized. And that is what we are pushing for as well as an outcome of this summit, in a way that it can continue to be an umbrella that even next year we could have an assembly that has been going through a roadmap through all existing engagements that we can have across the world, in a way that our voices continue to be heard all through, and in a way that we can also be able to support as many young people as possible with the assembly, because we are not just looking at bringing the young people to the assembly. And that is why even the Youth Innovation Challenge for us is one of the most important things, because the young people that get to live with the grants in that challenge, it means that they will continue to scale up their solutions. So if we are able to get into a really existing framework that allows us to get as many people as possible, for example, to even get funding or even small grants for their solutions, then that means that we have continuity even as these youth get back to their countries, that they are doing a lot more work in their space, that they are providing solutions in a huge way to get what they need to be able to scale up their solutions. I think for us, that is the most important thing.
Some of the feedback we've received on the youth agenda and the youth assembly is that it's being infiltrated by international organizations that want to dilute the African message to the world. How do you react to that, and how do you address those kinds of feedback?
Yeah, I think it's definitely feedback that comes up as well a lot. And I think for us, the most important thing is being able to ensure that Africa shapes Africa's narrative, and being able to have that understanding of who is speaking for the African continent. And it's in the same way that even for the young people, even as we are crafting our African Youth Climate Declaration, it's very clear that it's through the consultation processes that the young people from across the African continent are saying that this is what works for us. They're saying that these are the challenges and these are the solutions and this is the roadmap that we want to see. So these voices are what are helping us really just get done with that declaration, and that's what's helping us to be able to craft that in a way that they represent the voices of the young people. I think for me, the most important thing of how to go about that is to make sure that the narrative is actually a narrative that speaks for Africa. And for a narrative to speak for Africa, it has to be by the African people themselves. And I think if that processes allow that, then definitely it's something that really shows that the narrative is actually for the Africans. And I think being able to work with a lot of young people, I also lead the Wangari Maathai Youth Hub that has a lot of young people from across the continent that are leading various solutions in their own way. And I think for us, seeing young people from across the continent bringing solutions that work for their continent because they have seen the challenges in their continent, I think for me, that kind of a narrative is the narrative that we need to bring to the Africa Climate Summit in a huge way.
What would you ask of me as the CEO of the Africa Climate Summit, and what questions or concerns do you have as we organize the summit?
Yeah, thank you. I think my first question is, what is your vision for the young people and for youth engagement for young people across the continent at the Africa Climate Summit and beyond?
Thank you. As His Excellency says, the President of Kenya, President Ruto, we have the youngest continent in the world. And as the youngest continent, as part of the climate solution, our young people must not be just a resource into the climate agenda, but they must also play an active role in driving policymakers, investors, and so on in delivering the solutions that Africa has towards the world. So His Excellency's vision, which I am delivering as the CEO of the summit, is to ensure inclusivity. This summit is not about individuals, it's not about government or private sector, it's about all of us collectively. So I'm very excited that you are already going to be having a youth assembly. I'm even more excited that part of that youth assembly will feed into the climate summit, and there will be very active participation by members of the assembly in the summit to ensure that your voice is carried over into the different sessions and culminating in being part of the declaration. Please work hard. We want to hear your voices in all the thematic working groups and in the various panels of the summit, because then you will be part of what will come out of the summit. You will own the outcomes of the summit. And then because you're young and, as you said, you're energetic and you're innovative, you will hold the rest of us accountable to delivering against the commitments that are made at the summit. Excellent. So as you prepare to participate in the assembly and then the summit,
Yes.
And you see the agenda for the summit,
Yes.
are you identifying representatives? Because of course there'll be panels,
Yes.
but there will also be limited space in each of the panels and discussion forums.
Yes.
Will you be curating representatives who can speak for the youth in the various panels so that we're able to accommodate the voice, but it is a representative voice?
Yes, definitely. That's something we will be able to do. And also, if a lot of the solutions that are being documented right now for young people, the exhibitions, the innovations, can also be able to get a place to be able to platform that, to be able to engage with people. And this is also the same place where young people that are innovating can be able to meet with investors as well, to be able to help them to scale up what they're doing. So if they are able to have that platform that enables them to also have that direct engagement with the dignitaries, with everybody that is coming on board, I think that will be equally important. So we are definitely identifying a lot of the young people who is doing what in which space, so that if there is an existing opportunity, which is what now we're asking for, then we are able to provide you with like a list of young people that are really doing amazing things in that space, and then they can at least get an opportunity to be able to show what it is that they are doing. Yeah.
So I saw you speak in Paris at the Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
And we want the same excitement, if not more, at this summit.
Yeah.
How can we help young people have a similar stage, a similar platform, and bring our collective African voice and excitement to this summit as well?
I definitely see this as an opportunity to be able to showcase our talents, our culture as a continent. And I think looking at the African continent in terms of the cultures, in terms of the diversity, in terms of the beauty of our resources and everything we bring to the table, then it is possible for us to be able to shape something like that here. To be able to shape something like that, also being able to acknowledge our diversities, being able to have a platform where people can be able to show their different cultures. the different foods, for example. Young people can be able to showcase the different things they are innovating in their own spaces, and in a huge way that we can have an exchange of ideas, an art space as well, a music space as well, a place where all of these things have been put together in a way that people can engage, but in a way that it's framed in a way that we can be able to showcase the diversity and the cultures and the beauty of the continent. I think for me, that would definitely make for a beautiful Africa Climate Summit concert, for instance. And if this can be shaped in a way that even, for instance, as the declaration is being adopted, that the heads of state can be able to engage directly with the young people in a way that it is colorful, in a way that it is actually embracing the beauty of the continent, the talents that we have in our continent, and all of things that African as a continent represents culturally, I think that would make for a beautiful Africa Climate Summit declaration as well.
There you have it. Elizabeth and her team organizing the Africa Youth Climate Assembly are committed to delivering a continent-wide initiative that will drive the youth agenda around climate. They will push the rest of us to make sure they're represented, that we are speaking to their needs, but they will also be offering solutions. They will be bringing their innovations, their creativity to demonstrate and to support His Excellency's vision that we're in this together and each of us has something to contribute to the agenda. And most excitingly, they will also be creating some exciting opportunities around music, arts, entertainment to ensure that we're not only addressing the climate crisis, but we're celebrating our diversity as a continent. We're looking forward to having the summit and delighted to have young people at the heart of it.